Today's daf is daf Samaches, and we'll begin just a few lines down from the top, where the Gemara quotes a brisa, and we'll begin with the word yachol. That's where we got up to yesterday, which is line 4. We're talking about finding a source for the halacha that they did nituach of the par, they cut up the par into segments before the sreifa. Yachol, I might think that not only should they take the para out for sreifa, sholem, in a complete state, but yisrfena with sholem. Maybe they should burn it when it's whole without cutting it into pieces. How do we know nituach apar before sreifa? Nemar kan, because in the case of the par kohen Mashiach, in the parsha of Vayikra Dalid, pasuk Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Beis, it says Ves or hapar, Ves kol b'saro, al rosho v'al kra'ov. So that's what it says earlier in the parsha of Par Mashiach. So notice the words Rosho and Kra'ov. Nemar lahalon, in the case of Ktoris, of a carbon, the Haktorah of a carbon Ola, on the Mizbeach it says Rosho Ukrov, both in Par Mashiach and in Ola, in both cases, Par Kohen Mashiach and in Ola, carbon Ola, it says Rosho the Krav. And I'll read to you the pasuk in the parsha of Ola, which is at the very beginning of Sefer Yikra. It says, "V'archu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hanisachim es harash v'es hapodar." And the pasuk says, "V'kirbo ukrav yirchatz b'mayim." So we have now Gzeira Shava between Ola and Par Kohen Mashiach. Malahalan, just like in the case of Ola, is Maktira Yedei Nituach, because the pasuk says V'archu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hanisachim. So you have to cut it up into its members, into its parts. Afkan here too, with regard to burning the par of Kohen Mashiach, it's al Yedei Nituach. So the Brisa continues and asks, "E Malahalan." In other words, once you have this Gzeira Shava between Par, Kohen Mashiach, and Ola, then we should go a step further within the context of that Gzeira Shava. Malahalan, just like in the case of Ola, is Al Yedei Hefshed Or, when he burns the various parts of the Ola on the Mizbeach. It's after he does Hafshat Es HaOr. The pasuk says in the parsha of Ola, V'fshit Es HaOla, is Afkan here too, by virtue of the Gzeira Shava. In the case of Par Kohen Mashiach, we should also require Hefshet. And we're not going to burn the Avarim until we remove the R, we remove the hides. Talmud Lomar, we reject that Havamina because in the case of Par Kohen Mashiach, the pasuk says V'kirbo upirsho. And from this double phrase, somehow, we don't know how, we're going to derive the conclusion that we're not mafshit the R before Sreifa. So the Gemara immediately asks my Talmud, where do you see it in the pasuk? V'kirbo upir tomar papa. The Torah makes a hekesh between, on the one hand, Aru Basar, and the other hand, Kerev Uperish. Perish is the feces into the animal, the ray. And they're both written in one pasuk with regard to taking the Evarim Chutz L'Machnel L'Sreifa. It says, V'es or hapar, V'es kol b'saro, al rosho v'al kra'ov v'kirbo pircho. And the Torah, through this equation, is teaching me Hishem shepirsho b'kirbo. When the pasuk says b'kirbo pirsho, it means pirsho is b'kirbo, and the reason for that is we leave the peresh inside the intestines, the inner caris of the animal. It's not derech eretz to take the peresh out and expose it. That's repulsive. is kach, so too in the case of basar be oro. We're going to say, don't be poshet the or and take it out of the body. So just like we don't take the perish out of the body of kirbo, so too we don't take the or and strip it off the body. And lo mafshitim es ha'or b'shas ha'otzah. And the pasuk is talking about the moment of hotzah, not the moment of sreifa. So we're not going to be poshet the or and strip the or off the body of the par before sreifa. And with the hekesh between the zman of hotzah of sreifa sapar, that teaches me that even the sreifa, even though it requires being menatech to the for, but nevertheless not to be poshet the or. And the hekesh in that pasuk, because it says v'hotzi es kol apar el michutz lamachna makom tahor el shefach hadeshen v'sarafo so al eitzim ba'esh al shefach hadeshen yisarif. So that's the hekesh between the zman hotzah and sreifa sapar, and that's going to teach me also that there's no, even though there's nituach, but there's no afshotas ha'or. So let's just summarize. Once the Brisa has given us all these different limudim, our final conclusion and derivation is that the Har Kohen Mashiach requires nituch habasar lifnei sreif. You have to cut of the pieces on the limbs, etc. And that's derived from the Gzeira Shava to Ola, that we require nituach. And we're going to derive that there's no hafshatas ha'or from the hekesh between sorrow and pirshal. And therefore, let's now fast forward to, or rewind, I should say, to Rebbe Shita that we discussed yesterday, that with regard to the power of Yom Kippurim, we're going to derive Gzeira Shava from the power of Kohen Mashiach, and the same two halachas will apply, a requirement of nituach, but not to be poshet the or. Mishnah says, those who take the par and the sawyer out for burning, at what moment in time do their begodim become tameh? The Tanakam is of the opinion kishayetzu michutz le chomas hazorah. As soon as they exit from the hazorah, Shimon has mishiyatzis ha'or beruban. It's only when most of the par is burnt. So now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa that's going to address the question of where they did the streifa of the par and the sawyer, and then we're going to find a source for the Tanakama that the Tumas Begodim is initiated by Yotza Michutz Lazor. That's called Machna Achas. Ton Rabbanon we learned in the brisa. It says in the Torah with regard to the par and the sawyer of Yom Kippurim in Vayikra Tezayin, the ace parachatos ve'irachatos yotzi el michutz la machna, one machna v'sarfa ve'esh. So it seems that the sreifa took place outside of one machna. Now, we have three machnos. Let's go back to the Midbar. We have what's called Machna Yisrael. That's where the Jewish people as a whole were encamped. We have Machna Shnia, which is called Machna Levia, where the Levis were. And then the Shlishis is called Machna Shechina. And all this was from the Pesach HaChotz of the Old Moed, going inside from the east to west. And parallel to these three machnos in the Mishkan, during the Midbar period, we have three machnos in the Migdash. And they are Mipesach Yerushalayim ad Harabayis. And that's called Machna Yisrael. Mipesach Harabayis, listen carefully, till Pesach HaZorah, which is the Shara Nikanor, if you recall. That's called Machna Levia. And from the Pesach Hazor Lifnim, that's called Machne Shechina, as the Rambam describes it in Perek Zayin, Mihilchas Beis HaBechira. So the Brisa asks, Michutzla Machne, just one Machne? Which means Machne Yisrael? Lahalon. Now here we have to fast forward to Perek Dalid of Vayikra in the Parsha of Par HaEdah. That means that Bezdin mistakenly handed down a ruling which was against the Torah law, and the Tzibur, based on that ruling, violated the Torah law, and they have to bring what's called Par Lachatos, otherwise known as Par Helem Dover Shel Tzibur. And all the laws that pertain to that par are recorded in Vayikra Perek Daled and are addressed in Masechet Horios. And in the parsha, in Vayikra Daled, of Par Helem Dover Shel Tzibur, otherwise known as Par HaEdah, and we also have, by the way, the par of the Kohen Moshiach. And that's again the Kohen Gadol who was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. And he has to bring a par as a korban chatos or a soyer lechatos. Now, in all these cases of par, Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, par, Kohen Moshiach, atenosin lem shalosh machos. The sreifa, these are all chatos hanisrafos, is michutz l'shalosh machos. And the Gemara is going to explain how we know this in just a minute or so. So, what are the categories of karbonos chatos? We have a classic chatos hanacheles. An individual brings a chatos for violating an aver b'shogeg. That carbon is nechal l'kodim. And then we have something called chatos hanisrafos, where you don't need anything from the chatos. It's very unusual. All they do is they makte the murim on the mizbeach, and then they burn the entire basar of the chatos. And that's basically par Kohen Mashiach, par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, and the par and soyer of Yom Kippur. There's another parsha called the par soyer of Avodas Kochavim. But these are all what we call chatos hanisrafos. And in all cases, we're going to burn these chatos hanisrafos chutz l'shalosh machnos. Outside of Machne Yisrael. V'kan, and now you're telling me in the soyer of Yom Kippurim, atenosin lehem machne achas, you'll burn after leaving one machne, meaning the azara? It's impossible to say that, because par and soyer of Yom Kippurim are also called chatos pnimius. And with regard to chatos pnimius, like we mentioned before, the par kohen Mashiach and the par Eda, the Torah equates all the parim of all the chatos hapnimios and we derive the sreifa of par v'sar shel Yom Kippurim from the other chatos hanisrafos, and that means bichutz l'shalosh machnos. Im kein lo menemar bichutz l'machne. How could the pasuk say espar chatos v'soyer chatos yotzi el michutz l'machne v'sarfa beis? Meaning one machne. We know from the equation to par Kohen Mashiach and par Helim Dover Shel HaEdah that sreifa requires chutz l'shalosh machne. So why does it say chutz l'machne, implying one machne? And the Gemara answers, the Brisa answers, Lomar lecha, to teach us kevan sheyotza michutz lamachna achas mitamim b'bgadim. In other words, the pasuk here michutz lamachna in Perek Tezayin in Vayikra, and we're talking about pasuk of Zion, really has to be understood as an introduction to the next pasuk. Let's just open up the Chumash. The Parshas Achrimos, Perek Tezayin, pasuk Chaf Zayin, and it says, "V'rochatz es psor b'mayim makom kadosh v'lavashes v'yotza v'yotza soloso v'es olas ham v'kiper b'adavya v'eschele v'chatus egem ham shalech zasoil ham yichavis p'godot oh v'espar achatos v'seir achatos asher huvas domam lechaper b'kodesh yotzi." This is for streifa purposes, is it not? Yotzi el michutz l'machne v'sarfa be'esh. No, the Brisa says that pasuk of Yotzi el Michutz Lamachne is to be connected as an introduction to the following pasuk, Hasorefo Som Yichabes B'Gadav, and that means this Tumas B'Gadim. And therefore, it says Michutz Lamachne Lomer Lecha Kevon Sheyotza michutz lamachne achas mitam begodim. So again, the sreifa is going to take place chutz le gimel machnos, as we equate par v'soshe Yom Kippurim with the other chatos pnimios that are nisrofos, namely par shel kohen Mashiach and par helim dover shel tzibur, and therefore we require sreifa chutz le gimel machnos. This pasuk indicates machna achas. That's halacha in tumas begodim, and it's a new halacha because it means the very moment that the soref, who hasn't yet burnt the parvisoyer, was he left one machna, immediately he incurs tumas begodim, and this is a shita the Rabbanon against Reb Shimon in our Mishnah, that immediately after he leaves the Chomas HaZorah, he becomes Tomei, even though the Sreifa will only take place after he leaves the other two Machnas to Gimel Machnas. Now, at this point, the Gemara wants to bring a source in the Torah that the place for Sreifas Par Kohen Mashiach is Chutz L'Shalosh Machnas. I mean, the whole Brisa that we learned assumed that in the case of Par Mashiach, or Para Eda for that matter, the Sreifa is going to take place Chutz Mi Gimel Machnas. How do we know such a thing? Minolam. Anya, the Gemara now brings a Brisa. It says in the Torah with regard to Hotzas, Par Kohen Mashiach L'Sreifa Vayikri Dalid V'Hotzi Es Kol Apar El Michutz Lamachnas. And the Brisa says chutz l'shalosh machnas. So when it says in the pasuk the saraf also, it's when he left all three machnas. Atomer chutz l'shalosh machnas eino elo michutz l'machna achas. I mean, the Torah only says v'hotzi etc. is called a parallel michutz l'machna, implying one machna. And the Gemara, the Brisa rejects it and says kishu omer bepar ha'eda. The Torah says v'yihoti es hapar el michutz lamachna v'tzaraf also kasher saraf es hapar rishon. Now, once the Torah adds the words v'tzaraf also kasher saraf es hapar rishon, you wonder why the Torah had to bother by adding el michutz lamachna. She'ein Talmud lomar. These words el michutz lamachna don't teach us anything. Sherei kvar nemer in the same pasuk it says v'tzaraf also kasher saraf es hapar harishon, where he burnt the sreifa of the Par Kohen Mashiach that's mentioned right earlier. So we know that we're talking about sreifa chutz lamachna. So why did the Torah have to add these words El michutz lamachne. My Talmud Lomar, they're coming to teach me El michutz lamachne, meaning chutz lamachne of the of the um of the par ha'eda. Wait, just 1 second. Let me make sure we got the cheshbon here. Yeah, we started with the pasuk in Vayikra Dalet, namely the par ha'eda, and it says El michutz lamachne, but then it says Sarafal Sokash Sarfar Rishon, which means the straight for the par Mashiach. So we already know that the din is that in the para Eda, he's got to do a straight for chutz lamachne. That's explicit in the Torah. Why does it have to add the word el chutz lamachne? So the words el chutz lamachne are redundant. Nitain lo machne shnia. So now we have a second machne. In addition to the machne that we find in the Kohen Mashiach, we now have another michutz lamachne. On top of it tells me machne shnia. Okay, and we said before that the machne shnia is called the machne levia. The Brisa continues, Kshu Omer. Now we go to the Parsha of Hotzas Hadesh and Vayikra Vav, and the Torah again says, Michutz lamachne. Pasha is begun of Alav, begun of Machiv, Hotzias Hadesh Michutz lamachne. Is Badeshen, with regard to Hotzas Hadeshen, we have another time, a third time around that it says Michutz lamachne, and Ein Talmud Lomar. These words, El michutz lamachne, don't teach us anything. In other words, we know already that Hotzas Hadeshen is michutz lamachne shekvar nemar. In the parsha of Par Kohen Mashiach, it says V'hotzias kol hapar shel michutz lamachne el makom tahor el shefach hadeshen. So since it says that he's motzi the straight from michutz lamachne, and that location is identified as shefach hadeshen, so I understand that the makom hadeshen is chutz lamachne. So when the Torah says in Hotzas Hadesh shiotzi el michutz lamachne, that's totally redundant. So we have 3 times that the Torah says el michutz lamachne. Says the Raisa Tainlo lamachne shlishis. So we add up one chutz lamachne on top of the other to get us chutz lamachne shlishis, and it means that in all the Parman Yisrafim, which are all equated one to the other, the sreifa has to take place chutz l'gimel machnas. Again, as far as the Tumas Begadim is concerned, that's machna achas according to the Chacham. Now, Rabbi Shimon, okay, you squared off with the Chachamim, but Rabbi Shimon holds that the sreifa, the soreif, I should say, his begadim aren't nitmeim until he burns the par. Against the Chacham who say as soon as he leaves the first machne of Chomas Hazor, is high michutz lamachne my ovidle. What is he going to darshan from michutz lamachne? In par of Yoma Kippurim, we're going back to Vayikra Tezayin again, the post that we read before. Evias para chatos v'sorah chatos yotzi al michutz lamachne v'sorfo be'esh. What is he doing with chutz lamachne? Because again, the par is to be burned chutz l'gimel machnas. We needed that extra michutz lamachne to calculate that it's a streif of 3 machnas. But now we go according to Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon is saying that the big day asorev become tamei only when he burns the par. Well, guess what? He's burning the par chutz l'gimel machnas. And yet, Rabbi Shimon says that he's not metami begodim until after the Eish. after the Bira Aish. I'll just read to you this note here. He says, Rav Shimon in that Mishnah said that the par in the Surah of Yom Kippurim will only be metame after they're actually burning. So Rav Shimon does not agree with the brisa and the drasha that we had before, which interpreted the phrase chutz lamachna with regard to Yom Kippurim, the par and the soyer, as teaching that they convey tumah as soon as they leave machna achas, right? Because it says in the pasuk, 1 second, right? Yotzia el michutz lamachna, and then immediately in the next pasuk, it says, and we said that in pasuk of Zion, when it says chutz lamachna, which implies only one machna, that's referring to tumas begadim in the next pasuk of ches. But Rav Shimon doesn't have the luxury of interpreting the chutz lamachna, which means machna achas, chutz lachomas hazara, and that's referring to V'rochatz Pesaro, by Yichabis Begodov, I should say. That can't be because Rav Shimon postpones the Yichabis Begodov and the Tumas Begodim until Sreifa, which is Michutz L'Gimel Machna. So how could the pasuk say Michutz L'Machna implying one Machna? According to the Chacham, it's very good because this Michutz L'Machna is one of a series of 3 Michutz L'Machnas to tell you that the Sreifa has to be Michutz L'Machna. So the Gemara answers, Mi boile, Rab Shimon needs this pasuk michutz lamachne l'keditanya. Lezer Omer Nemar Kan, it says in the parsha of Par v'sorchi Yom Kippur michutz lamachne v'nemar lahalan. This is Tamar's kriya in Paraduma. It says v'nasatam osa. So we have a Gzera Shav michutz lamachna. Makan in the case of Par of Yom Kippurim is chutz l'shalosh machnos. We're going to have to take the Par outside of 3 machnos in order to burn it. It's aflahala, and so too with regard to the Paraduma. Chutz l'shalosh machnos. Now, what are we talking about? The paraduma has many different parts of the process. So Rashi says that we're talking about shchita, the shchita of the paraduma, and it's got to be michutz l'shalosh machnos. And now this Gzera Shava goes in the opposite direction. And Paraduma is going to shed a light on the Parvisar of Yom Kippurim. How so? Malahal, just like in Paraduma, b'mizracha shel Yerushalayim. The Torah says, V'hiza el nochach p'nei oel moed. Again, in our Parshas Parah. It means, what does it mean when it says he has to stand mul, just like an arrow. If you shoot an arrow to the Pesach of the Heichal, which is open towards the east, so the Mazah, insofar as he has to stand mul oel moed, and that's in the east of Yerushalayim. Again, his face is turning towards the west, but is Afkan here too in the case of Par Yom Kippurim. The place for the Sreifa is Mizracha Shel Yerushalayim. Now the Gemara goes back to the Tanakama, who disagrees with Reb Shimon and says that there's Tumas God in the very moment that the Kohen HaSorev leaves the Azara, the Machna Achas. And that's because they used the michutza machne of Par and Yoma Kippurim to teach me that the big day Asorev nitmoim miyad kshiyotza michutza machne achas. They don't have this gzerah from Paradu. Eicha sarif lahu. And Rashi explains that we're asking towards what direction out of Yerushalayim were they soref the par and the sor. And the Gemara answers Kiddusanya like we learned in the Brisa with regard to Chatos Pnimos that requires Sreifa Chutz Shalosh Machnas Heichon Nisrafin. In which direction do you stand? Towards which direction do you stand for the Sreifa of the Chatos Pnimius? Where in Yerushalayim? And on Daf Samach Amid Beis, the Brisa says Litzfona Shel Yerushalayim. In other words, we are going to now classify Chatos Pnimios, where the Sreifa is Chutz Machne, under the category of a Korban Ola, or for that matter, of all Chatos. And that's got to be always Safon.